The forest was quiet, eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that made you feel like you were the only one left in the world, surrounded by towering trees that whispered secrets to one another. The sun hadn't quite risen yet, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. Emma Thompson pulled her jacket tighter against the early morning chill as she stepped off the patrol truck and onto the rugged trail that led deeper into the woods. Her canine partner, Ace, a lean and strong Belgian Malinois, bounded happily at her side. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air, always on alert, always ready for whatever challenge the forest might throw their way. Emma couldn't help but smile at him. They had been partners for years now, and the bond between them was unspoken but strong. She trusted him with her life, and he trusted her with his. But today, something felt off. Emma paused for a moment, scanning the woods around her. The trees seemed denser than usual, their branches stretching outward like arms reaching for the sky. The forest was vast, covering hundreds of miles, but Emma had always felt at home here. It was her sanctuary. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching. Ace stopped in his tracks, ears perked, his body tense. Emma crouched down beside him, her heart rate picking up. "What's got you, boy?" she muttered under her breath, running her fingers through his fur. But Ace didn't answer. Instead, he stared off into the trees ahead, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. A sudden rustling in the underbrush snapped her attention back to the present. Emma's hand instinctively went to the holster at her side, where her service weapon rested. She hadn't heard anything, but the rustling sounded like something, or someone, moving through the forest. It was too deliberate to be a passing deer or squirrel. This was human movement. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to stay calm. Ace's growl broke the silence again, low and menacing. "Easy, boy," she whispered. But Ace wasn't calming down. His body language was stiff, every muscle coiled as if ready to spring into action. She stood up slowly, scanning the trees. The wind had picked up, swirling the leaves around her feet, and the light in the sky began to shift. A storm was coming, but it wasn't the weather that was making her uneasy. It was the silence that followed, the kind of silence that suffocated, like the calm before a storm. Suddenly, Ace bolted forward, breaking into a run. Emma swore under her breath and sprinted after him. "Wait, Ace!" she shouted, but the dog didn't stop. He was moving faster than she could keep up with. Emma's heart raced as she pushed herself harder, but the dense forest floor was no friend to someone in a hurry. She had to force her legs to move faster, but they felt like lead. After what felt like an eternity, she finally caught up with Ace. He was at the edge of a clearing, his head low to the ground as he sniffed the air. The hair along his back was standing on end. Emma approached cautiously, heart pounding, and then she saw it. Hanging from a tree by a set of thick ropes, upside down, was a woman. Her hands were bound tightly, and her body dangled unnaturally, her face pale and battered. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The woman's gear was scattered around her, a trail of blood leading to where she now hung, trapped. Emma's hand flew to her radio, but her voice caught in her throat. "This is Ranger Thompson. I've found a—" Her words cut off as she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The woman wasn't unconscious. Her eyes flickered open and locked onto Emma's. A sudden jolt of panic ran through her. Who had done this? And why? There was no time to waste. She approached the woman cautiously, her mind racing. It didn't take a trained ranger to see that the woman had been tortured. The ropes around her wrists were tightly wound, cutting into her skin. Emma's instincts kicked in, and she immediately began to assess the situation, her hands shaking as she reached up to cut the ropes. But before she could act, The sound of footsteps echoed from behind her. Emma froze. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady but firm. Her hand hovered over her weapon. There was no answer. The footsteps stopped. Damn it! Emma's mind was racing. She didn't have time to figure out who was behind her. She had to get the woman down and out of here fast. As she cut the final rope, the woman's body fell, her limbs collapsing as she landed in Emma's arms. "Gotcha," Emma whispered, her voice thick with relief. The woman's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she slumped against Emma, unconscious again. Emma turned to Ace, her heart still racing. "Stay close, boy," she whispered, already thinking of the quickest way back to the ranger station. But Ace wasn't listening, his head turned to the left, his ears perked. "Shh, boy, stay quiet," Emma said, but Ace growled low again. The hairs on the back of Emma's neck stood on end. Something was coming. Just then, a voice shouted from behind her, low and threatening, "Leave her alone, Ranger." Without thinking, Emma grabbed the woman and bolted, racing toward the tree line, with Ace right at her heels. Want to hear what happens next? Hit that subscribe button on Heroes for Animals to follow Emma and Ace's thrilling journey through the forest and uncover the truth behind this mysterious attack. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she ran through the forest, the sound of her boots crunching against the thick underbrush blending with the frantic growl of Ace behind her. She could feel the weight of the woman in her arms, the limpness of her body, and the pulse of fear that shot through her veins. Every step she took felt like a race against time, the urgency of the situation fueling her legs to move faster, pushing through the exhaustion. The trees around them blurred as she sprinted, twisting and turning through the labyrinth of trunks. The branches overhead reached out like fingers, scraping at her face and arms, but she barely felt it. She couldn't afford to slow down, not with Ace by her side, still growling and watching their back. There was something out there, something that had been waiting for them in the shadows. "Come on, Ace," Emma whispered, urging the dog forward. "We're almost there." But the woods were vast. The trail she'd been on was a long way behind them now, and even the faintest rustle of leaves made her jump. She knew the terrain well, but the forest wasn't the place to lose your sense of direction. Her instincts screamed that they weren't safe yet, that something was still watching, waiting. Her eyes flicked toward the clearing they were approaching. It was too open, too exposed. If they made it there, they would have nowhere to hide. Emma pushed herself harder, Ace pulling ahead, his sharp nose catching every scent in the air. He was more than just a dog. He was her protector, her partner in this wild, unpredictable world. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Emma saw a small cabin up ahead. A ranger outpost. Her destination. She could just make out the silhouette of the building through the trees, the faint glow of light coming from the windows. It was the only sign of civilization for miles. Her heart raced, hope blooming in her chest. If they could just make it there, they'd be safe. But then a shot rang out. The crack of the gunshot echoed through the trees, sharp and cold, like a slap to the face. Emma's heart skipped a beat, and Ace lunged forward, his body tense with aggression. He growled deep in his throat, looking back at Emma as if to say, "Move faster." The sound of the shot was followed by the unmistakable sound of someone running. Fast. Someone was after them. Emma's chest tightened as she gritted her teeth, pushing the woman harder into her arms. She couldn't let them catch her. Not now. Not when they were so close. "Come on," Emma muttered to herself, her mind racing. She reached down and unclipped the sidearm at her belt, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the gun. She didn't want to use it. She never wanted to use it. But she wasn't about to die out here. Not when she could fight for her life. Not when Ace was with her. They were only 50 yards from the cabin now. 50 yards. from safety. But the woods weren't finished with them yet. Another shot rang out, this time closer. The bullet whizzed past Emma's head, so close she felt the wind from it. She ducked instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. Whoever was after them wasn't messing around. They were determined to take them down. "Move, Ace! Move!" Emma shouted, her voice strained. Ace barked once, as if acknowledging her command, then shot forward, sprinting ahead of her and the woman in her arms. Emma pushed herself harder, her heart pounding in her chest. The cabin was so close now, just a few more steps. And then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in front of them. A man, tall and wearing dark clothes that blended into the shadows. Emma's heart skipped a beat as he raised his hand, a gun aimed directly at her. "No!" Emma screamed, but it was too late. The man pulled the trigger, and the world seemed to slow down. Time stretched as the bullet flew through the air, but before it could reach her, Ace was there. The dog launched himself forward, tackling the man with a force that sent him crashing to the ground. The gunshot went wide, and the bullet ricocheted off a nearby tree. Emma didn't wait. She ran toward the man, pulling her gun from its holster. She aimed it at him, but Ace was already on top of him, biting down on his arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. The man screamed in pain as Ace held on, never letting go, his teeth locked in a death grip. "Stay down!" Emma shouted, her voice harsh. She pointed the gun at the man, her finger tightening on the trigger. The man's eyes widened as he realized he was caught. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "Please, don't move." Emma interrupted coldly, her heart still racing. She kept her eyes locked on the man, her gun steady, her mind racing. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. He was too busy struggling to get Ace off of him, but the dog wasn't letting up. Emma stepped closer, her gaze never leaving the man's face. She could hear the faint sounds of other movement in the distance. More of them were coming. Her finger brushed the trigger, but she didn't pull it. Not yet. Not until she had answers. The man's breathing was shallow, his face contorted in pain. Ace growled, his teeth showing as he kept the man pinned to the ground. But Emma was in control now. She had the power. "Talk!" Emma commanded. The man looked up at her, eyes wide with fear. He started. But then the sound of another voice interrupted them. "Emma!" She turned quickly, her gun still aimed at the man. A second figure emerged from the trees, this one more familiar. It was one of her fellow rangers, Chris. He was out of breath, his face tense with worry. "Who's this?" Emma asked, never lowering her gun. Chris didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked from Emma to the man Ace was holding down. Then he looked at Emma. "Not good," Chris muttered under his breath. "We've got trouble, Emma. More of them are on their way." "Who are they?" Emma demanded, her voice sharp. Chris shook his head, his face grim. "I'll explain later, but we need to move, fast. They've been watching you." The cabin door slammed open as Emma rushed inside, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind still reeling from the narrow escape. She had barely made it out of the clearing, with the man Ace had subdued still groaning on the ground outside. Chris, the fellow ranger who had just arrived, helped Emma carry the woman into the small, dimly lit cabin. It was an old outpost, built decades ago and barely used anymore. The floor creaked under their weight as they moved through the entryway and into the small kitchen area, where Emma gently laid the unconscious woman on the worn couch. "Stay with her," Emma said to Chris, her voice tight with urgency. "I need to figure out what's going on." Chris nodded, but there was no hiding the concern in his eyes. The situation had escalated far beyond what either of them had expected. "You think this is some kind of isolated attack?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Emma replied, shaking her head. "But I've got a bad feeling. Someone's been watching us, and they're not done yet." She glanced over her shoulder at Ace, who had settled at her feet, eyes still scanning the room. He was alert, his ears twitching at every sound outside. Emma felt the weight of his presence, that unspoken connection they shared. He was her partner in this chaos, and she trusted him with her life. A few moments passed in tense silence as Emma stood by the window, peering out into the dark forest. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the ground. She could hear the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of an owl, but there was no mistaking the quiet unease in the air. "We can't stay here," Emma said, turning to Chris. "We need to get her to the station and get some answers." Chris was already packing up a first aid kit. "I agree, but there's no way we're getting to the station without running into more of them. Whoever those guys were, they've got us cornered." Emma's jaw tightened. She didn't like it, but Chris was right. If they tried to leave now, they'd be walking right into a trap. The thought of running scared her. But there was no other choice. If they stayed here, they'd be sitting ducks. "Then we make our stand here," Emma said, her voice determined. "We fortify the place. We hold out until morning and then make a move. We'll get Catherine." She paused, glancing at the woman lying on the couch, "to the station at first light." Chris gave her a sharp look. "You really think they'll let us wait that long?" Emma nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkened forest outside. "They want something. If they didn't, they'd have finished the job by now. But they're waiting. They're watching." Chris exhaled sharply, setting the first aid kit on the table. "Well, if we're waiting, we need to know who we're dealing with. What exactly did you see out there, Emma?" Emma hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I didn't get a good look at them. The man we caught." She glanced at Ace, who was still alert. He wouldn't talk. "But there's something off about this whole situation. We were set up, Chris. They knew we'd be out there."
Chris leaned in, his eyes focused on her. "So you think someone within the system's involved? A mole, maybe?"
Emma shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know. But whoever's behind this, they're well organized. They're not just random criminals." The cabin felt smaller, the air heavier as the weight of her words settled over them. It was no longer just a rescue mission. It was something much bigger. And the more Emma thought about it, the more she realized how deep it went. This wasn't just about Catherine. This wasn't just about the attack in the woods. It was personal. They had been targeted. "What if this isn't the first time?" Chris asked, breaking her thoughts. "What if there's been more going on out there? More rangers disappearing or getting attacked, and no one's put it together yet?" Emma turned to face him. "That's what I'm afraid of. If we don't figure this out soon, we could be next." A soft moan from the couch interrupted their conversation. Catherine was waking up. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a brief moment they locked onto Emma's with a look of confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Easy," Emma said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe. We're at the ranger cabin. You're gonna be okay." Catherine's hand shot up, trembling as it reached for her neck. "The ropes! The forest!" She seemed disoriented, her mind struggling to catch up with the reality of what had happened. "Who?" Emma placed a hand gently on her arm. "It's okay. Just breathe. You're safe. You were attacked, but you're here now. We're going to get you help." Catherine's breathing steadied as she processed the situation, her face pale but determined. "I need to tell you everything," she said, her voice stronger now. "I think I know why they attacked me." Emma felt a chill crawl down her spine. "What do you mean?" Catherine looked over at Chris, who was still standing by the table. "They've been watching all of us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just the forest. It's everything." Emma leaned in closer. "What do you mean, everything?" "Who is they?" But Catherine's eyes flitted nervously to the window, her expression a mix of fear and urgency. "I don't have much time. They'll be back soon, and I don't think we'll make it out of here alive unless you understand the bigger picture." A sudden loud bang echoed from outside, followed by the unmistakable sound of a vehicle engine revving up. Emma's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone anymore. "Get down!" she shouted, pulling Catherine to the floor and signaling Chris to do the same. Through the small cabin window, Emma saw the headlights of a truck bouncing toward them, kicking up dust from the dirt road. They were here. The hunters had found them again. "This is it," Chris muttered. "We either fight or run." Emma's mind was racing. The moment had arrived. She needed to act quickly. But the truth Catherine was about to share was the key to everything. And they had no time left to waste. "We fight," Emma said, her voice resolute. "But we do it smart. No one's getting left behind." The game had changed. And now Emma had no choice but to face the truth head-on, whatever it was. The truck's headlights grew brighter as it barreled down the dirt road toward the ranger cabin. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Every muscle in her body tensed. They had no time left. The decision was already made. It was now or never. "Chris, barricade the door!" Emma shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Chris darted toward the small kitchen, pulling a chair and a nearby wooden shelf to the door in an effort to block it. Meanwhile, Emma quickly knelt beside Catherine, whose pale face had flushed with anxiety. "You've got to stay down," Emma said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "No matter what happens, don't make a sound. We're going to make it out of here. But you have to trust me." Catherine's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded silently, clutching the fabric of Emma's jacket with shaky hands. The two women shared a brief, understanding glance. Catherine had been through hell, but so had Emma. And no one was going to stop them. Outside, the rumble of the truck's engine echoed like thunder as it came to a screeching halt in front of the cabin. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the sounds of boots hitting the ground, heavy footsteps approaching the cabin. Ace's ears perked up as he stood beside her, a low growl vibrating through his chest. The dog was ready for anything. Emma couldn't help but appreciate the loyalty in those dark, intense eyes. They were a team, and he was her rock. The door creaked, the weight of the truck's occupants obvious as they surrounded the cabin. The men on the outside didn't speak, but Emma could hear the rustle of their clothing, the way their boots scraped against the rough ground. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. "Stay quiet," Emma muttered to Catherine, her fingers curling tightly around the grip of her service pistol. Chris joined her at the window, his face grim as he peered out through the narrow crack. "They're getting ready to breach the door," he whispered. "If we don't act fast, we're done for." Emma's mind raced. They needed a plan. They needed a way out. She glanced around the cabin. There was no back door, no other exit. They were boxed in. Her eyes met Chris's, and he seemed to understand her unspoken question. His gaze flicked to Ace, then back to Emma. They had only one option: fight their way out. "We go on the offensive," Emma said firmly, already moving into position. "When they come in, we take them down, fast and hard." Chris nodded, pulling his gun from its holster. Ace tensed, as if understanding the stakes, ready to spring into action. Emma's pulse quickened, but she pushed the fear down, focusing on the task ahead. Her mind was clear. She had done this 1,000 times before, just never with this much on the line. The fear was normal. It was a part of the game. But what mattered now was keeping control. The truck's engine shut off, and the sound of heavy footsteps moved closer to the door. Emma held her breath, waiting for the moment when they'd make their move. And then, without warning, the door flew open, splintering as the men outside pushed through the makeshift barricade. 3 armed figures rushed into the cabin, their dark silhouettes towering in the dim light. "Down!" Emma shouted, and without hesitation she dove forward, taking cover behind the table. Chris followed her lead, moving swiftly to the other side of the room. Ace was already on the move, charging toward the intruders with a bark that sent chills down Emma's spine. The first man, surprised by the sheer speed of the attack, reached for his gun, but Ace was faster. The dog lunged, knocking the man to the ground with a powerful shove. He yelped in pain, but Ace didn't let go. He locked his jaws onto the man's arm, keeping him immobilized. Emma didn't waste a second. She fired, the sharp crack of her gun breaking the tension in the air. The second man dropped to the ground, his body crumpling in a heap. She had only a split second to move before the third man reacted. The last man raised his weapon, aiming straight at her. But before he could pull the trigger, Chris fired, hitting him square in the chest. The man staggered back, falling against the wall. He crumpled to the floor, the gun slipping from his hand. Emma exhaled, her body still coiled with adrenaline. The cabin was silent, except for the sound of Ace's low growls as he kept the first man pinned to the ground. "Are we clear?" Chris asked, his voice tense. "Not yet," Emma replied, her eyes scanning the room. "Keep your guard up. There's more to this than we know." She stood slowly, her hands shaking from the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but she couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. Not when they were this close. Catherine, who had been hiding behind the couch, slowly stood up, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice shaking. "For now," Emma replied, glancing at the bodies scattered across the cabin floor. She couldn't afford to think about the implications of this fight. Not yet. They still had to get out. The truck outside was still parked, and Emma could hear more movement coming from beyond the trees. The battle wasn't over. It had just begun. "I'll check the truck," Chris said, stepping cautiously toward the door. "See if anyone else is out there." Emma nodded, gripping her gun tightly. "Be careful. We don't know who else is involved in this." She turned back to Catherine, who was still standing shakily by the table. "You all right?" Catherine nodded, but her face was filled with fear. "I don't know what's happening. Why are they after me? What do they want?" Emma's mind whirled with the same questions. She had a sinking feeling that this wasn't a random attack. Whoever these people were, they were organized, methodical, and they were going after something bigger than just Catherine. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything you know," Emma said, her voice low but firm. "Everything. We're not out of the woods yet." Catherine hesitated, but then her eyes softened. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I think I know who's behind this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emma stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Who?" But before Catherine could answer, the sound of footsteps outside the cabin stopped her. Chris reappeared, his face ashen. "They're here," he said, his voice tight. "More of them, and they've brought backup." The air was thick with tension as the door creaked open again, and this time Emma wasn't sure if they would make it out alive. The silence in the cabin was deafening, broken only by the rapid thud of Emma's heartbeat. Her eyes flicked to Chris, whose expression had hardened in the dim light. More of them were coming. Emma could feel the weight of their footsteps, heavy, deliberate, as they moved toward the cabin. The air outside was thick with anticipation, and the calm before the storm was only growing more suffocating. "We've got maybe a minute before they breach again," Chris said, his voice low and grim as he scanned the room. "We need a plan. Now." Emma's mind was already working overtime, calculating their options. But every exit was blocked. She glanced at Catherine, who was standing by the window, still shaken but resolute. There was no time for long explanations. "We fight our way out," Emma said, her voice tight with resolve. "We hold them off long enough to get Catherine to safety. We've got to make it to the edge of the forest, to the fire break. There's no way they're following us in that direction." Chris raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "The fire break's miles away, Emma. Even if we make it there, we're exposed." Emma turned, her eyes meeting his. There was no doubt in her voice. "We don't have a choice. If we stay here, they'll pick us off one by one." A sudden burst of shouting outside snapped Emma out of her thoughts. There was no time to argue. They were here. "Get ready," she whispered, pulling Catherine back into the shadowed corner of the cabin. Ace immediately moved to her side, his ears perked and his body tense. Emma couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for the dog. He was always on alert, always prepared to protect her. No questions asked. Chris motioned toward the window and crouched low, watching the approaching figures through the crack in the wooden boards. Emma joined him, her pulse racing. "They're spread out," Chris muttered. "Looks like they're coming at us from all sides." Emma nodded, her mind already working through their options. There was no easy way out, but if they could get to the fire break, they'd have a fighting chance. She looked at Ace. "You're with me, buddy. Stay close," she whispered, and the dog let out a low growl in acknowledgement. Outside, the men were closing in. Emma could hear the crunch of boots on the forest floor, their heavy steps drawing closer. Her grip on her gun tightened. She wasn't going to let them take her or Catherine without a fight. The door creaked again, and a figure appeared in the frame, silhouetted against the dim light outside. Emma didn't wait. With a practiced move, she rolled to the side and fired. The shot rang out, sharp and loud in the confined space. The man dropped to the ground, his body crumpling in a heap. But it wasn't enough. Another man rushed forward, his face obscured by a mask. He swung a heavy metal pipe, aiming for Emma's head, but Ace was faster. The dog lunged, knocking the man off balance and sending him sprawling to the floor. "Go now!" Emma shouted to Chris as she shifted her aim and took down another figure creeping toward the back of the cabin. Chris grabbed Catherine's arm, pulling her toward the back door. "This way! Come on!" But before they could make it, a scream echoed through the cabin. Emma whipped around just in time to see a fourth man enter from the side, his gun raised. He was too close. Before Emma could react, Ace was there again, his teeth sinking into the man's leg. The man let out a strangled scream, but Ace didn't release him, shaking his head violently. Emma rushed forward, her heart racing, and fired. The man collapsed, the gun falling from his hand. "Let's move!" Emma shouted. With Ace leading the way, they dashed toward the back of the cabin. Chris and Catherine followed closely behind. They burst through the door into the darkness of the night. The forest was still, as though holding its breath, the trees looming like silent sentinels. "Head toward the fire break," Emma ordered, her voice sharp. "We've got to keep moving." They sprinted through the underbrush, branches snapping against their faces as they pushed forward. Emma's lungs burned, but she didn't stop. She couldn't afford to stop. They were only a few hundred yards from the fire break, but it felt like miles. Ace led the way, darting ahead with incredible speed, his dark coat blending into the night. Emma followed, her gun at the ready, watching the trees around them. She could feel the presence of the men still pursuing them, could hear their footsteps just beyond the trees, getting closer by the second. "Don't look back," she urged, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Keep moving!" Chris was right behind her, and Catherine, though exhausted, was pushing forward as fast as she could. Emma couldn't let herself think about what might be behind them. All she could focus on was getting to safety. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air, a bullet whizzing past Emma's ear, too close. She ducked instinctively, but the shot had been meant for her. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. They weren't just after Catherine anymore. They were hunting them. "Stay low!" Emma shouted, and they all hit the ground, crawling through the underbrush. The fire break was just ahead, the trees thinning out as they neared the clearing. Another shot rang out, and Emma cursed under her breath. They were so close, but the attackers weren't letting up. "We're almost there!" Chris yelled. "Keep going!" Emma didn't respond. She just pushed herself harder, her legs burning with the effort. The firebreak was in sight now, a wide, open expanse of land. The trees had thinned out, and beyond it was a road that could lead them to the ranger station. The truck that had dropped off the men was parked just off to the side, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Emma's mind raced. They had to make it to the road. They had to— "Look out!" Chris shouted. Emma barely had time to react. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shadow of another man, this one moving toward them with a raised rifle. He wasn't more than 30 feet away. Before Emma could raise her gun, Ace was already in motion. The dog charged at the man, knocking him off his feet and sending the rifle flying. The man struggled, but Ace held him down, growling fiercely. "Move!" Emma shouted to Chris. "Get her to the road!" Chris didn't hesitate. He grabbed Catherine by the arm and pulled her toward the firebreak, the road just a few steps away. Emma turned, her heart racing, but there was no time to waste. She had to make sure they were safe. With one last glance at Ace, who was holding his ground, Emma fired another shot, hitting the man trying to get back to his feet. She didn't wait to see if he was down. She sprinted after Chris and Catherine. The firebreak was just ahead now, and with the road within reach, Emma finally allowed herself to take a breath. But the fight wasn't over yet. They were far from safe. The road was open, but so were the dangers waiting ahead. They had made it out, but the night was far from over. The night was still thick with tension as Emma, Chris, and Catherine sprinted toward the open road, the firebreak now just a distant memory behind them. The ground beneath Emma's boots felt softer as they crossed into the clearing, the familiar sound of her breath filling her ears. She barely had time to think before another gunshot rang out, the sound of metal splitting the night air. "Keep moving!" she shouted, not waiting for a response. Her mind was already calculating their next move. They were almost to the road, but she could feel the pursuers gaining ground. They weren't going to let them get away this time. The headlights of the truck were still glaring in the distance, and Emma's heart raced. They needed a car. They needed an escape. And fast. "Chris, take her to the road," Emma called out. "I'll cover you." Chris didn't hesitate. He grabbed Catherine by the arm and, with determination, pulled her toward the safety of the road. The seconds felt like hours. Emma could hear the distant sounds of footsteps behind them, the attackers closing in. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing. She saw the first shadow break through the trees, another figure with a rifle raised, ready to take a shot. Without a second thought, Emma raised her own gun and fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the forest, but the man staggered back, clutching his side. "Go!" Emma shouted, urging Chris and Catherine forward. They had to keep moving, but as they ran, a new figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and imposing, his face obscured by a dark mask. He was different from the others, his movements more calculated, deliberate. Emma's instincts flared. This wasn't just some hired muscle. This man was the real threat. He stepped forward, a smile playing at the edges of his lips. "I'm impressed," he said, his voice low and mocking. "You actually made it this far, but you won't make it much longer." Emma's heart skipped a beat. There was something about this man that felt wrong. He wasn't just a thug. He was someone important, someone who had been orchestrating this whole operation. "Who are you?" Emma demanded, her voice shaking but fierce. The man chuckled, his eyes glinting in the moonlight. "That's not important right now. What matters is that you and your little friend here are going to stop meddling in things that don't concern you." "Catherine," Emma muttered under her breath, looking back at Chris. They had to keep moving. But Catherine was frozen, fear written across her face. "Run!" Emma shouted at her. "I'll hold him off." Chris didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Catherine's arm and pulled her toward the road again, But the figure stepped into their path, blocking their only escape.
You really think you can stop us?
The man sneered, raising his gun. The standoff stretched for a heartbeat, the air thick with the weight of the decision. Emma's gun was still aimed at him, her finger on the trigger. The man looked like he was about to speak again, but Emma didn't give him the chance. With a roar, Ace charged forward, barking fiercely as he attacked the man, sinking his teeth into the man's shoulder. The force of the impact sent the man stumbling back. But Emma couldn't wait to see what happened next. She ran forward, covering the distance between herself and the man in a few quick steps, firing once more. The shot landed, but the man wasn't dead. He staggered back, still clutching his rifle. But he wasn't fast enough to react before Ace knocked him down. "Go now!" Emma shouted to Chris and Catherine. With a last glance at the struggling man, she turned and ran toward them. Chris was already pulling Catherine toward the road, their footsteps fading into the distance as Emma sprinted to catch up. They had made it. They were almost there. But before they could reach the edge of the road, the screech of tires filled the air, and another vehicle came roaring down the dirt path toward them. It wasn't over. Not yet. Emma felt her heart sink. There was no way out. Not without a fight. "Stay down!" she ordered, pulling Catherine and Chris behind a nearby tree as the truck skidded to a halt, blocking their path. Emma's grip tightened on her gun. She wasn't going to let them take her or Catherine without a fight. The truck door swung open, and more men piled out. The leader, the same man who had tried to stop them earlier, walked toward them with a smirk on his face. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold. "This is where it ends." Emma was out of options. The fire in her chest burned, but there was no choice left. She had to protect Catherine. She had to protect everyone. "Come on, Ace," she whispered to her dog, who was growling low in his throat. His eyes locked on the men. Without a word, she raised her gun once more, ready to make her final stand. But just as the leader raised his own weapon to fire, a loud crack echoed through the clearing. The man dropped to the ground, his gun falling from his hand. Emma blinked, stunned, as the figure of a new person appeared from the shadows. A woman, a ranger. Emma's breath caught in her throat. "You've got to be kidding me," Chris said, his voice full of disbelief. The woman stepped forward, her rifle still raised. "You're not the only ones who know how to play this game," she said with a wry smile. The remaining attackers hesitated, confused by the unexpected help. The woman didn't wait for them to regroup. She fired again, taking out another one of the men with deadly accuracy. "This isn't over," the leader hissed, backing away as he reached for his radio. But it was too late. Ace lunged, knocking him down once again, holding him in a vice-like grip. The woman lowered her rifle and smiled at Emma. "Looks like I'm just in time." Emma lowered her gun slowly, exhaustion flooding through her as she realized they were finally safe. "Who are you?" The woman gave her a curt nod. "Name's Sarah. I've been keeping an eye on you for a while now. Looks like we're in the same business." It was hard for Emma to process everything that had just happened. The truth about Catherine, the conspiracy, the attackers. It was all starting to come together. But they weren't out of danger yet. Not by a long shot. "Let's get out of here," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I've got a safe place nearby. We'll figure out what's going on." Emma nodded, finally allowing herself a moment to breathe. The night was far from over, but they had survived. For now.
Thank you so much for following this journey with us. We've reached the end of this chapter, but the story is far from over.
What do you think is next for Emma, Ace, and Catherine? Could this be the start of something much bigger? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on what happens next.